So of course these price increases all come, or let's say cluster at a particular time in the history of the Ming that you allude to in your title, the price of collapse, which is that moment when the Ming is kind of falling apart, and as we know retrospectively, indeed, indeed collapses and leading to the conquest by the Manchus. So your hunt for prices eventually leads you into a historical debate that has been going on since day one of after the collapse of the Ming, when scholars were sort of obsessed with why did this empire collapse, and has been going on in a quite heated manner for even the last few decades. So I thought it might be nice to hear from you, where you fit in this question that has attracted so many people. Why did the Ming collapse, even if that isn't how you got into it? Partly because it'll help get people a sense of the significance of your findings in this sort of larger historical context.
Well, you're absolutely right. That the data all pointed me towards the last 8 years of the Ming Dynasty. And this is when China went through one of the most remarkable climate downturns in the last, I'd say the last 2 millennium, probably the worst climate crisis China has experienced. Started in around 1637, 38, goes through to 1644, 1645, and the result for the Ming Dynasty is that it collapses. Now, there is a long historiography on the collapse of the Ming, and it sometimes is pinned to the Emperor Chongzhen, who was not hopeless, but he was facing a lot of problems. Sometimes it's pinned on his administrators who were corrupt, who were lining their own pockets, who were failing to do what needed to be done. We also have peasant rebellions that start in the northwest, in Shanxi, and eventually move in on Beijing and take the capital in 1644. So we've got all of these elements, but the overarching theme of the historiography is that the Ming failed in some way. And I want to revisit that, because the idea that the Ming failed, or that Ming officials failed, or that the emperor failed, is actually a narrative that the Manchus develop shortly after they take China in 1644. They need a way to tell the Chinese people what's happened to them and why the Manchus should be their rulers. And Dorgon, who led the invasion, who's one of the senior Manchu leaders, made a point of saying, well, Chongzhen was okay. He wasn't a terrible ruler, but the people around him were all corrupt. His military commanders were incompetent. And so the reason the Ming fell is not because we Manchus came in and overthrew your regime. It's because your regime collapsed and we came in to provide you Chinese with a new government. So that was the Manchu narrative of the fall of the Ming. And it's a narrative that Chinese took on in the first couple of decades of the Qing dynasty. It was a sort of mea culpa. I, as a subject of the Ming, failed to defend the Ming, failed to keep the Ming emperor on his throne, failed to keep the Ming dynasty alive. And it was a fairly popular narrative position to take. And that is then cast a long shadow all the way into the 21st century. So if you look at textbooks on the fall of the Ming, it's usually corruption, bad administration, failure to keep the postal system and the military system running properly. It's all viewed as failures on the part of the people who served the Ming. But once you realize the scale of the environmental crisis that was going on through the last 8 years of the Ming, once you bring that in, you have to start asking other questions. And that's what I did, because my data on famine prices during the Ming by far the worst data and the most concentrated data are in those last 8 years of the Ming. And it was the data revealed to me an environmental crisis on a scale that China had never experienced before, and the Ming had never experienced before. And to somehow blame Ming officials for having allowed the dynasty to fall is quite beside the point if you don't bring in the climate. You have to bring this in. And that's why I focused the book on the collapse of the Ming to provide a different narrative. Now, it doesn't mean that the Ming wasn't having problems. They were having difficulty raising taxes, difficulty maintaining the military, but those are fundamentally fiscal and financial problems, and they were having those problems because there was no grain in the field. There were no taxes to collect. So the climate crisis was causing a huge financial and economic crisis from which the Ming simply did not recover.